What's up, everybody? Peter X Coffer here, and welcome to another episode of All Things Music. Today, I'm going to look at an interesting phenomenon that's going on that I noticed coming out of the pandemic. This is a little more on the business side of the music industry, but the lack of the seeming lack of top 40 radio stations in certain very large markets. There's three big companies that own a big share of the radio stations out there. iHeartRadio used to be Clear Channel's the biggest. Then you have Audacy, Audacy, and then clocking in at third is Cumulus. So what's got my attention is before the pandemic, 2019, here in Indianapolis, Indiana, we had three top 40 radio stations. And during the pandemic, we went from three top 40 radio stations to one. And, as I guess, as a musician, that's going to grab your attention because, fewer radio stations means less competition and fewer opportunities to get on the radio. Now, the stereotype, or there's folks out there that think that radio is dying and people don't listen to the radio, and the numbers right now is saying that's not the case. 80% of the people in the U.S. age groups listen to radio once a month, and this is from the Radio Broadcasters Association. Even folks 18 to 24, still 73% of those folks, and that would be Gen Z, still listen to radio, and this is as of 2023. So that number I just gave you, that general number, is put out by Forbes, and this was done in 2023. And again, it was a radio industry survey. Forbes did one for 2024, current year, 35 and older. 74% listen to radio, 13% podcast, 9% streaming, and 4% satellite radio. 18 to 34, 45% radio, 37% podcast, 18% streaming. This is a month. So there's still a lot of, the Forbes numbers differ a little bit from the radio industry numbers, but still 45% of 18 to 34-year-olds are still listening to radio once a month. And so, it's still relevant, and radio play still matters. Gen X listens to the radio the most. So why does this matter? Well, there's that phrase out there, earworm, which means sticky music, or a song gets stuck in your head. Repetition is still very, very important when it comes to falling in love with a song, more or less. Most songs, the more you listen to it, the more you like it, the more you fall in love with it. And it's, there's always, there's songs out there that, even if it's by one of your favorite artists, you may not like it at first, and eventually it grows on you because of that repetition. So it is, it's in the brain, it's in the brain structure. I just read a book on music in the brain, and it didn't get into that specific phenomenon. But, music in the brain is very, very, it's a very interesting topic, and they're finding out more things about, the brain on music. The growth or falling in love with a song that you may not like initially, through repetition of listening was not in the book, but it's still a very interesting phenomenon. I think most of us have had an experience where, that song's all right. And then it's like, finally you're like, okay, this song's dope. I really like this song. So yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's almost like a good song becomes a drug, and the more you listen to it, the more you like it. So a couple examples for me. I mean, I'm a big Prince fan. I have a Prince sub channel. You know, when I was in boot camp for Marine Corps, the summer of 1984. So when Purple Rain dropped, I was not around, and I got back in about 4 or 5 days because we got a nice little check coming out of boot camp. So what I did is I got a nice little boom box, and the first thing so I get back, I'm listening to Prince or listening to radio, and Let's Go Crazy comes on. I'm like, oh my gosh, I remember 1999. Like, let me get hooked up with this guy. I need some more of this. But the song that never grabbed me was When Doves Cry. And to be honest with you, it wasn't until recently, until I saw the video that was on MTV at the time where I got it. I was just kind of like, the song. Prince is weird. He has other weird songs. This song is definitely one of his weird ones, and I respect the fact he pulled the bass out of it and it hit #1, but I never really got it until I saw the video, and I was like, oh, probably Prince's best video. But by the time I got back, which would have been late August of 1984, that song was no longer #1. MTV was no longer, had that video in heavy rotation. So in that aspect, it was, the video and the story that I have with When Doves Cry is similar to that song that, what's his name? Childish Gambino, the anti-violence song. I mean, that's another song. I mean, he got Grammys and video awards, I believe, for that song, but you got to see the video to really get the power of the song. And so for some ways, When Doves Cry is the same way. But that's a song, even to hear it in a repetition, I was kind of like, yeah, I love Prince, I like the song, but it wasn't until I saw the video. Another artist, Al Green. I mean, for years, for whatever reason, I couldn't get Al Green, and in like my mid to late 20s, I finally got Al Green and fell in love with Al Green. But it's again that issue of, it took a while for, the earworm to jump in and be like, you need to really wake up on Al Green. Recently, Rich Baby Daddy. I mean, so I usually, full disclosure, my radio play happens in the car. I also will have on Music Choice, which is my cable thing around the house. But honestly, when I'm doing Music Choice, I'm either doing blues or the 70s, 80s, 90s, classic rock, classic R&B. Usually, I'm not doing the new stuff when I'm on, but I probably need to switch that up and jump into the new stuff. They're top 40 too. But it's usually driving around. Then the other, to make up for that, I go through two of the big the weekly music hits. They have, there's two today's hits, and I forget the other one on Spotify, and then I do Just Hits, which is a little more. You get a little more EDM and disco on Just Hits, and Hot Hits, Today's Hits. Those are like their the top 40 for Spotify, and then I'll go and listen to forget whatever the big list is on Tidal. And Tidal, there's a lot more hip hop. I mean, that's probably 80% hip hop. So that's where I might get know what's going on in hip hop. Well, I'll just say it took about 30 or 40 listens for Rich Baby Daddy to sink in and get me hooked, but it did. But again, it took 30 or 40, listens for that to happen. So yeah, that's kind of the earworm thing that's going on. Now, so I actually dived in and I was curious to see what other cities only have one top 40 radio station. And I came up with 17, and some of these will be a surprise. So I already told you about Indianapolis. You got Pittsburgh, you got Atlanta, you got Jackson, Mississippi, New Orleans, Dallas, Houston, Albuquerque, Tucson, Columbus, Ohio, Cleveland, Fort Wayne, Indiana, St. Louis, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Los Angeles, and Sacramento. Big list, big cities with only one top 40, radio station. Now, very interesting. Here's a couple of other anomalies for those cities. Atlanta had 9 hip-hop radio stations. So, newsflash, Atlanta had more hip-hop radio stations than Los Angeles or New York City. Hip-hop was founded in New York City. Los Angeles was the second big city. But, hey, if you're a hip-hop artist, you want a break, head to Atlanta. And as I said earlier, there are only 3 big, companies that own. So some of these, some of those 9 radio stations, hip-hop radio stations in Atlanta are independent. So, you're not, you should have, you can actually go in and talk to somebody and maybe get some airtime there. So definitely if you're a hip hop artist, go down and check out the Atlanta scene. I know I just had knew a drummer up here a couple years ago who went to Atlanta and is now producing music down here. So Atlanta's been the hot scene. You remember Erykah Badu went to Atlanta. Babyface in LA, in the 90s or the 80s, they went to Atlanta. Babyface is originally from here in Indianapolis, but, so Atlanta's a destination spot for music right now, particularly hip hop and R&B. So when you have 9, hip hop radio stations down there, it makes sense. Now, also on this list was Los Angeles and Sacramento. And the interesting thing is, California probably had the healthiest radio scene. Los Angeles maybe has more radio stations than New York. When I say a healthy scene, Los Angeles and San Diego still have blues radio stations, the only 2 blues radio stations in the U.S. So, Los Angeles and Sacramento comes with a caveat in that I'm pretty sure you can find, they have so many niche radio stations, particularly Los Angeles, that, if you have good, what we call music companies or quote unquote record companies will be able to get their music played in Los Angeles. They just have to know which niche radio station to focus on. So yeah, but again, big cities here. We're talking Minneapolis again, Milwaukee, St. Louis, pretty also interestingly enough, Midwestern, and then you have the 2 biggies down there, Houston and Dallas, and down there in Texas. So yeah, that's a problem though. If you're Universal or Warner Music, you want more options as far as when trying to get your music played. The other thing I found, in just FYI, there's a lot more country stations than anything else in the U.S. Outside the Northeast, I'm talking Boston, Baltimore, Philly, and New York City. That's, when I'm talking about the Northeast, I'm talking about there because Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C. have a lot of country stations. So we're talking north of Pittsburgh and D.C. That's, that area of the country does not have a lot of country radio stations, but everywhere else does. Indianapolis, I think, had 7 or 8. And clearly, that's beyond the big 3, Cumulus and Odyssey and iHeartRadio. So again, these are independent, radio stations, and might be easier to get on that, So this sort of may explain why Beyonce is, did a country album, born and raised in Texas, and Post Malone is now doing collaborations with country artists, because there are more opportunities to get on the air, and then Jelly Roll's probably going to be a trend. I mean, a guy who mixes hip hop and country. I mean, I think we're going to see more of that because there are opportunities out there, and by far there is more country radio stations and new radio stations in this country. I mean, I tracked, uh, hip hop is probably second, but a distant second to the country. Right? Literally a distant second. I mean, the only place that was saturated like country was Atlanta, as I said. But there's a lot of places. There's a lot of, you probably have outside of that, the Northeast, you probably have, I mean, literally half the radio markets probably have, 5 to 7 country stations. So, hey, country, I mean, go where the money's at, I guess. That's all I'm saying. I'm just putting information out there for folks to digest. So what are the implications of this? Well, I mean, if you're trying to move pop acts, and those are still, that's where the billion streams come from, are the pop acts. And again, we looked at the numbers and took down some of those myths. Yes, folks under 40 don't listen to radio as much as older folks, but they still listen to it, and it's still very important because, the whole earworm phenomenon kind of, happened subtly and slowly. And, and part of that earworm phenomenon is just, going about your daily life and hearing the song, like, you know what, I mean, going to a restaurant and the song's playing in a restaurant, or, being outside and someone, turns up their car radio and it's that song again. So it's these random, there's also this element of the random, meetings up with certain songs that lead to the earworming. So, the other option, if you're if you're a record label, is streaming. I've discussed TikTok before. Universal pulled off all their music on TikTok because TikTok was not paying the artists; they were paying the content creators on TikTok. And I can vouch for that. The guy did some of my stuff play on TikTok and big zeros next to him. I'm sure they're not paying me. I haven't looked at the numbers lately because, I mean, I don't, make a lot of money on streaming. You have to get a lot of streams, to make money. But yeah, so TikTok, but they came to an agreement. And I talked about this, Billboard article from October of 2023 where, the A&R people from the record said they had no idea how things break on TikTok. They could not figure it out. They could not figure out the algorithm. So quietly Universal and TikTok, made up, and, Universal stuff is on there now. Now the question is, was it about money and, knowledge of the algorithm, or was it just about money? I think it was probably about both. But Universal and TikTok obviously have not come out and said, yeah, we have an agreement, yada yada yada. So there's just this phenomenon, called payola, and basically, the myth is it says you can't pay for airplay with music. Well, if you do, you can pay. The DJ just has to, tell the audience that, so-and-so paid me money to play the song. Well, nobody's going to do that. It makes, the company look bad. The audience will feel like they're being manipulated. So that doesn't happen. But that's not the case for Spotify. Spotify is the best list, the streaming list, you can pay for that. I'm pretty sure the record labels are paying for to get certain songs put on the best list. So that's but the problem with relying on Apple Music or Spotify or whatever is you're a slave to that and the algorithms on these music streaming platforms are very narrowly focused, and they're focused to steer you to the same type of music all the time. I mean, that ultimately seems what a lot of these. I mean, it's what the TikTok algorithm essentially does as well. I mean, I'm not, TikTok's algorithm is very, very addictive. I don't go on there often because of that, because you get sucked in, and 3 or 4 hours pass, you're like, I just wasted those 3 or 4 hours. But TikTok, very quickly figures out what you like and just feeds you more of that over and over again. Talking about radio again, back in the 70s, I mean, DJs would break songs. I mean, Rush was broken, I think, off of a which they called album-oriented rock, which we now call a classic rock station, but out of Seattle. That's how Rush broke. Famously Kiss, the fans, a couple Kiss fans in Terre Haute, Indiana got mad because the radio station wouldn't play Kiss, and so they started picketing the radio station, and the radio station started playing Kiss in little old Terre Haute, Indiana, and eventually other radio stations were playing Kiss. So you could do that now. You can pick it whatever. The radio station ain't going to play that group. I mean, the DJs don't even get to decide. I mean, all that is done. Radio stations have their own quote unquote Spotify's and Apple Music, and the song that is played is determined by AI and an algorithm, and what's hot and how often they want to play that song. And I mean, in general now, I think top 40 radio stations play about 30 songs at one time. I was driving up and along I-69 in Indiana, a little bit after Fort Wayne, and there was a top 40 radio station there that proudly said we only play 20 songs. And they only played 20 songs, but they were the popular ones, and that's just how. And then, top 40's always done that, but they drill down, and if you can get in those 30 songs, you're going to make a lot of money. So yeah, I've been, did some research, went through all of the radio stations online by city, and looked at the numbers. Interesting, I seriously doubt that, there's all that this, what we see when it comes to competition, when it comes to top 40 radios, a new phenomenon. I think the country, radio thing is it's not surprising. It's, I think that's probably been studied for a while. Again, I only started looking at this year. But the record companies can't be happy that top radio is the competition is leaving in so many markets. And the question is why. I don't know. But if I was a record executive, or in charge of getting I don't know how they do this these days. How does Universal or Warner play, how they break a new song? How do they get a song on radio? I mean, probably you go through Spotify first, and that helps, but I guess you pay to get in the right music list on Spotify, but again, there's only about 30 songs. I know, as I listen to all three of the old top 40 stations here in Indianapolis, the one that's left was sort of in the middle. There was another one that was actually owned by Radio, Urban One. It's called Urban One now. It used to be Radio One. Was black owned. They played more R&B and a little more hip hop. And then the other top 40 that folded played more traditional pop. So they're gonna pay more chain smokers and you know, uh, can't what was Ed Sheeran and Nat. So yeah, I mean, we had three different, top 40 radio stations in 2019, slightly different curated playlist, and you could listen to one that you liked. Don't have that choice anymore, so that's kind of what this is about. So just wanted to put all this out there, and something to chew on. It'll be interesting to see how this affects breaking new artists for the big three or four record companies / music distributors out there. So anyway, appreciate you coming through. Let me work on this close. So subscribe to the channel, hit the like button. Would definitely be interested in hearing your comments. Also be, if anybody has any theories about why these top 40 radio stations are shrinking, that would also be interesting too. It's interesting. If I, the market in Florida that had the most would have been, top 40 radio stations was Orlando. Where I was like, well, that's interesting. I mean, I think they had four. And I was like, well, you do have the tourists there. But, if you have any theories about why these top 40 radio stations, and I mean, no, not top 40 radio sucks. Look, it's problematic compared to the past, but I mean, that's still where the money's at. So, but, if you just want to say top 40 radio sucks, feel free. I won't get mad. But, I'm curious if anybody has any theories about why this is happening. So yeah, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, leave some comments. I got 5 of my own albums. They're tagged here on my YouTube channel. I record under the name Exodus, Xodus, and I'm on all the streaming services. And I also have 2 science fiction fantasy novels and a novella on Amazon. So thanks again for coming through, and I'll see you next episode.